My own father killed my husband on our wedding day. Now you are my bride, as you always should have been, he whispered while tearing my white dress. The man who should have protected me destroyed my life in a single night. Good morning, my dear friends. It's so wonderful to be able to chat with you again. My name is Gertrude Oliver Montgomery. I'm 72 years old, and today I live here in Harrisville, a small town in rural West Virginia. A blessed little place, with pleasant weather and people who welcomed me as if I'd been born right here. Every morning, I wake up early, even before the sun appears. I prepare my coffee and start organizing my work materials. That's right. At my age, I still work decorating wedding ceremonies here in the region. I'm known as Miss Gertrude of the Flowers because I make arrangements that are true works of art. I use seasonal flowers, satin ribbons, and I have a special way of lighting reception halls that makes any bride sigh with emotion. I started this work almost 20 years ago when I decorated the wedding of a neighbor's daughter. She was in trouble because the decorator they hired fell ill at the last minute. I had experience with crafts and flowers, so I offered to help. It was such a big success that soon people started calling me for other events. At first, it was just for friends and family. Then word spread, and today, even at my advanced age, I still decorate at least 2 weddings a month. Some people find it strange when they see me arriving at venues, a little old lady with white hair carrying fabric samples and arrangement catalogs. But when I finish transforming an ordinary space into something magical, everyone understands why I'm still in such high demand. Each wedding I decorate is like a way of rewriting my own story, of giving other brides the perfect celebration that was stolen from me. If you're enjoying listening to me, please do this grandma a favor. Click on the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot to bring our stories to more people. And you, my dears who are watching me now, tell me in the comments, what little town are you listening from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with your coffee, after lunch, or late at night? I read all the comments and love knowing where your kindness comes from. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of affection. While I prepare my flower arrangements, I often find myself thinking about how life takes turns. How a story that began with so much pain can transform into something beautiful. And it's about that story that I want to talk with you today. About how I lost everything in a single day, but found the strength to start over and build a new life. I was born in Appleton, Wisconsin, in a simple but tidy house on the outskirts of town. My father, Eugene Oliver, worked as a carpenter and was known for making the most beautiful furniture in the region. My mother, Zenobia, was a seamstress who made wedding dresses that were true works of art. I'm sure I inherited from her that eye for detail and that desire to transform moments into something special. We were 3 sisters. Me, the oldest, then came Dorothy, who was 2 years younger, and the baby, Harriet, who was born when I was already 7 years old. I remember our house as if it were yesterday. The wooden floor that my father waxed every Sunday, the wood stove that stayed lit all day during winter, and the large backyard where we played when the weather allowed. We had a cherry tree that was our joy in spring. Life was simple back then. We'd wake up with the rooster's crow, help Mama with household chores, and then go to the county school about a 20-minute walk away. I loved studying, especially literature. My teacher, Miss Olivia, said I had a special way with words. Dorothy liked math more, and Harriet, well, she was too young to have preferences. In the late afternoon, after school, we would go to Daddy's workshop or watch Mama sew. She taught me my first stitches when I was about 9. We started with simple things, a hem, a patch, but soon I was already helping with the embroidery on wedding dresses. Good hands for delicate things, my mother would say, proud. On Sundays, we'd all go to service at First Baptist Church. It was the social event of the week. After the service, families would gather in the town square to chat, and the children would play together. That's how I met my best friends, Ivy, the baker's daughter, and Nancy, who lived on the nearby farm. We played Ring Around the Rosie hide-and-seek house. Sometimes, when it rained, we'd stay on the porch of one of our homes, making up stories or creating rag dolls. But not everything was rosy in our childhood. From an early age, I noticed that my father had a different way with me. It wasn't like with my sisters. He was always watching me, wanting to know where I was, who I was talking to. At first, I thought it was just protection because I was the oldest. "Daddy's right eye," he'd say. But over time, that look became heavier, more possessive. I remember once, I must have been about 10, when the neighbor's son, Arthur, gave me a flower he had picked on the way to school. Kid stuff, you know? But when I came home with that simple daisy in my hand, my father turned purple with rage. "Who gave you that? Why did you accept it? I don't want you receiving gifts from any boy." He snatched the flower from my hand and crushed it under his foot in front of everyone. Mama tried to calm the situation. "Eugene, for God's sake, she's just a child." But he replied in a voice that gave me chills, "My daughter isn't going to go around accepting favors from just anyone." As I grew older, things got stranger. At 12, when I started changing from a girl to a young lady, my father decided I could no longer play in the street with the other children. "A young lady's place is inside the house, learning to be a good homemaker," he'd say. While my sisters still had the freedom to run and play, I stayed helping Mama with the wedding dresses. Sometimes, when Mama needed to go out to deliver an order, Daddy would make up an excuse to check on my work. He'd just stand there, watching me sew for hours. "You're going to make the most beautiful dress when it's your turn," he'd say, with a strange gleam in his eyes. "But it has to be a man I approve of, you hear? Nobody is good enough for my princess." Mama noticed something wasn't right. Sometimes, I'd catch her looking at us with concern. Once, I overheard her arguing with my father. "You treat the girl like she's your property, Eugene. That's not normal." He responded coldly, "I take care of what's mine the way I see fit." Life in Appleton had its own rhythm. The seasons passed marked by traditional celebrations. The county fair in May, with its colorful banners and typical sweets, the 4th of July with bonfires and hot apple cider, and Christmas, when the entire town was decorated, and the church choir rehearsed songs that echoed through the square on December nights. It was at one of those 4th of July celebrations, when I was 12, that I realized how my father kept me away from other people. While everyone danced around the bonfire, ate corn on the cob, and had fun, he kept me by his side, as if afraid of losing sight of me. When the store owner's son, a 14-year-old boy, innocently invited me to dance, my father stepped between us. "My daughter doesn't dance with anyone." That night, I cried secretly under the covers. I didn't understand why I couldn't be like the other girls, why my father treated me so differently, even from my own sisters. It was as if he wanted to keep me in a glass box, where only he could admire me. It was around that time that I started dreaming of leaving that house, that town. While helping Mama sew wedding dresses, I imagined myself wearing one someday, marrying a good man who would take me far away. For me, those white dresses weren't just fabric and thread. They were promises of freedom. Time passed, and when I turned 16, the situation at home became even more difficult. My father no longer bothered to disguise his strange behavior. He forbade me from participating in town festivities, from talking to boys, even from going to church without him. "The world is full of wolves ready to devour a little lamb like you," he'd say, while looking at me in a way that gave me chills. It was around this time that Mama started defending me more firmly. "Eugene, you're going to make the girl sick this way. She needs to live, meet people, have friends." The arguments between them became more and more frequent and intense. Sometimes Daddy would leave slamming the door and only return at dawn, smelling of whiskey. On those nights, Mama would come sleep in the room with me and my sisters, as if wanting to protect us. Dorothy and Harriet didn't fully understand what was happening, but they felt the weight of that suffocating atmosphere. "Why does Dad pick on you so much?" Dorothy would ask when we were alone. I didn't know how to explain. How could I? I didn't even understand that behavior myself. However, even with all the restrictions, my father couldn't watch me all the time. He needed to work in the carpentry shop, and it was on one of those afternoons, while he was busy with a large order, that I met Oliver. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was helping Mama deliver a wedding dress to the pharmacist's daughter's house. The wedding would be that weekend, and the girl wanted to make the final adjustments. When we arrived, she was with her cousin, who had come from Pittsburgh for the ceremony. Oliver Mendoza was 22 years old, studied engineering, and had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen in my life. "Are you the one who made this wonderful dress?" he asked, looking at me, not at my mother. I turned as red as a tomato and stammered that I had only helped. Mama smiled, proud. "My Gertrude has fairy hands for embroidery. Almost all the beadwork on this dress was done by her." While Mama helped the bride with the dress, Oliver started chatting with me. He told me about his studies, about how Pittsburgh was different from Appleton, about his plans to graduate and open an engineering office. I, who barely talked to anyone besides family, was enchanted by this young man who spoke of a world I didn't even imagine existed. "And you, Gertrude, what do you like to do?" he asked with genuine interest. No one had ever asked me that before. I told him about my work with dresses, about how I like to create flower arrangements to decorate the house, about the books I read in secret when Daddy wasn't looking. When we said goodbye, he said something that stayed etched in my memory. "You deserve much more than this small town can offer." And then, in a bold gesture that left me breathless, he asked for my address to write me letters. Mama saw everything, and to my surprise, didn't scold me. On the way back home, she only said, "That young man seems to be a good person, Gertrude, but your father—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew that my father would never approve of any young man who approached me. The letters started arriving 2 weeks later. Oliver would send them to Ivy's house, my childhood friend, who would deliver them to me when we met at the market or in church. They were beautiful letters, full of poetry and dreams. He told me about college, about the books he read, about how he thought of me every day since we met. In one of them he wrote, "I know we barely know each other, Gertrude, but I feel you're the person I've always been looking for. Someone with whom I can share not just life, but also dreams. Someone who understands the value of delicate and beautiful things." For 6 months, we maintained this secret correspondence. I kept the letters inside the lining of an old dress at the bottom of the wardrobe. At night, when everyone was asleep, I would reread each word by candlelight, dreaming of a different life, away from my father's suffocating control. In some of my responses, I told Oliver about my father's strange behavior, about how he treated me differently from my sisters, about how he would rage when any boy looked at me, about how I felt suffocated in that house. "Sometimes I'm afraid of him," I confessed in one of the letters. "There's a look in his eyes that isn't normal from a father to a daughter." Oliver would respond with words of comfort and promises. "One day, I'll get you out of there, Gertrude. We'll build a life together, away from all this." On a Sunday in March, when I was already 17, Oliver showed up at church by surprise. My heart nearly jumped out of my mouth when I saw him sitting in the back pews. Daddy was by my side, as always, his arm possessively around my shoulders. Throughout the service, I avoided looking back, but I could feel Oliver's presence like a beacon of hope. At the end of the service, when people started greeting each other, Oliver approached our family. He politely introduced himself as the cousin of the bride for whom Mama had made the dress months ago. He said he was passing through town and wanted to personally thank her for the wonderful work. My father shook his hand so hard that I saw his knuckles turn white. "Pleased to meet you," he said in an icy voice that didn't match the words. His eyes went from Oliver to me, as if looking for some sign of complicity. "You have a very beautiful family," Oliver continued, unintimidated. "And your daughter has a special talent for embroidery. The dress she helped make was the most talked about at my cousin's wedding." I saw my father's face transform. A vein pulsed in his forehead, and the forced smile didn't hide the fury in his eyes. My daughter doesn't need compliments from strangers, he said through clenched teeth. Let's go, Gertrude. Your mother prepared lunch. And he pulled me by the arm with such force that it left purple marks on my skin. That afternoon, hell broke loose in our house. As soon as he closed the door, my father exploded. Who is that fellow? How does he know so much about you? Are you meeting in secret? The questions came like bullets from a gun, one after another, not giving me time to answer. He's just the bride's cousin, Daddy, I tried to explain, my voice trembling. I saw him only once, when I went with Mama to deliver the dress. Liar! He shouted, hitting his fist on the table so hard that the plates jumped. I saw how he looked at you, and how you avoided looking at him. Something's going on, and you're going to tell me now. Mama tried to intervene. Eugene, for God's sake, you're scaring the girl. He was just a polite young man complimenting her work. But he was already beside himself. He went up the stairs toward my room, with Mama and me running after him. He started turning everything upside down. Drawers, wardrobe, mattress. That's when he found the letters, carefully hidden in the lining of the old dress. What happened next still gives me nightmares. He read a few lines of the first letter, and his face became distorted with rage. He tore all the letters into small pieces, throwing them in the air like a paper rain. Then he turned to me with a look I'll never forget. You are my daughter, he said in a low, dangerous voice. No man is going to take you from me. No man. At that moment, I saw something in his eyes that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just anger. It was possession, obsession, a sick feeling that a father shouldn't have for a daughter. Eugene, enough. My mother put herself between us, for the first time confronting him directly. You're sick. This isn't normal. If you continue like this, I'm taking the girls to my sister's house in Philadelphia. It was the first time I saw my father hit my mother, a slap so hard that it threw her against the wall. My sisters, frightened by the shouting, watched everything from the bedroom door, crying silently. Nobody leaves this house without my permission, he growled. And you, Gertrude, are forbidden from leaving this room until I decide what to do with you. I was practically in private captivity for 2 weeks. I could only leave to go to the bathroom, always watched. Meals were brought to the room, and my father had the key that locked the door from the outside. Mama managed to stay a few minutes with me sometimes, always afraid, always whispering so he wouldn't hear. We're going to find a way to get out of here, she promised, stroking my hair. This can't continue like this. It was during this period that I heard my parents arguing in the middle of the night. Mama threatened to report him to the authorities, to leave with the daughters, to seek help from the church. My father always responded the same way. Try something, and you'll regret it for the rest of your life. In the 3rd week, when I was already losing hope, I received a message from Oliver through Dorothy. My sister had met with him secretly after school at Ivy's request. The note simply said, "Don't give up. I'm going to get you out of there. Trust me." That small piece of paper gave me strength to endure the days that followed. The hope of a life away from that house, away from my father, was the only thing that kept me sane. A month after the incident at church, my father finally allowed me to leave the room, but with conditions. I could no longer help Mama with the wedding dresses, couldn't go to the market or church without him, and would have to drop out of school. The only thing you need to learn is to be a good daughter, he said, with that disturbing look that had become his trademark. It was around this time that I first heard my parents talking about sending me to a convent. She'll be safe there, my father would say, away from men who just want to take advantage. What he really meant was, away from any possibility of me building my own life. The months that followed were a nightmare. My father seemed obsessed with the idea of keeping me isolated from the world. He completely prohibited me from leaving the house, except for Sunday service, where he held me by the arm the whole time, as if I might run away at any moment. And maybe I would try if I had somewhere to go. The most frightening change, however, was in his behavior when we were alone. He started making comments that made me deeply uncomfortable. "No man will love you like I do, Gertrude," he would say. caressing my face in a way that made my stomach turn. "You're too special for any of these boys in town." One night, I woke up with him sitting on the edge of my bed, just watching me in the dark. When I asked what he was doing, he answered in a strange voice, "Just checking if my princess is safe." The way he said, "my princess," caused me such deep fear that I couldn't go back to sleep. Mama noticed everything. She saw the looks, heard the comments, noticed how he created situations to be alone with me. One afternoon, while Daddy was at the carpentry shop, she came into my room with eyes red from crying. "My daughter," she said, holding my hands tightly, "this can't continue." "Your father? There's something wrong with him. The way he looks at you isn't normal. It's not the look of a father for a daughter." I cried in her arms, finally able to share the fear that was consuming me from within. "Mama, sometimes I think he's going to do something terrible. I'm afraid to sleep. I'm afraid when he comes near me." That same night, I heard my parents having the worst argument yet. Mama confronted him directly. "I know what's going on in your sick head, Eugene. I see how you look at her, how you touch her. It's a mortal sin, an abomination. If you touch her, I swear to God I'll report you to the authorities, no matter what happens to me." His response was a silence, followed by a low laugh that chilled my soul. "You have no proof of anything, Zenobia, and nobody would believe you. I'm a respected man in this town. You're just a hysterical woman." The next day, Mama called me to her room while Daddy was working. "We need to escape," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I'm going to send a letter to my sister in Philadelphia. She can shelter us for a while until we can get established. We'll take your sisters too, of course." For 2 weeks, we planned our escape in secret. We gathered the little money Mama managed to hide from dress deliveries, separated some clothes and belongings we could carry without raising suspicion. Mama sent a letter to her sister, Aunt Olivia, asking for urgent help, without going into details, but making it clear it was a life-or-death situation. The answer came a week later. "Come, the house is open for you." It was all we needed to know. We planned our escape for a Monday, the day my father always went to the neighboring town to get materials for the carpentry shop. It would be our only chance to leave without him noticing immediately. We planned to take the 10 o'clock bus to Philadelphia, which passed about half a mile from our house. But on the eve of the escape, something unexpected happened. Oliver showed up at our door, accompanied by an older man who introduced himself as Dr. Gumersindo, a lawyer from Pittsburgh. Daddy wasn't home. He had gone to the evening service, one of the rare moments he went out without taking me along. "Mrs. Zenobia," said the lawyer, with a formality that impressed me. "I'm here at young Oliver's request, who has reported to me a concerning situation involving your daughter Gertrude. He showed me some letters where the young lady describes the inappropriate behavior of her father." Mama turned pale. Oliver quickly explained, "I kept copies of the letters Gertrude sent me, describing her father's behavior. I showed them to Dr. Gumersindo, who is a friend of my family. He believes we have grounds for legal intervention." "Legal intervention?" Mama repeated, incredulous. "You mean, report my husband?" "Exactly," confirmed the lawyer. "Based on Miss Gertrude's accounts, we can request a protective measure. The behavior described constitutes psychological abuse, unlawful restraint, and there are indications of other intentions that I prefer not to name in the presence of the young ladies." Dorothy and Harriet observed everything from the kitchen door, eyes wide at these strangers and the tense conversation. Mama started crying, a silent weeping of relief mixed with fear. "We were planning to escape tomorrow," she confessed, "to my sister's house in Philadelphia." "That could complicate the situation," warned the lawyer. "If you leave like that, your husband could accuse you of kidnapping your own daughters. We need to do this legally." It was then that Oliver knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. "Gertrude, I know it may seem rushed, but I have a proposal that could solve everything. Marry me. As my wife, you would be legally under my protection, no longer under your father's guardianship." The world seemed to stop at that instant. A marriage proposal, right there, in the middle of our living room, with Mama, my sisters, and a lawyer as witnesses. It was everything I had dreamed of since I met Oliver, but in the most unexpected circumstances. But I'm only 17, I stammered, bewildered. I need my father's permission to marry. That's when Dr. Gumersindo intervened. There's an exception. With your mother's authorization and evidence that the paternal environment is harmful, we can obtain a special judicial authorization. It won't be easy, and your father will certainly fight against it, but it's possible. Mama approached, holding my face between her hands. Daughter, it's your decision. Do you love this young man? Do you trust him? I looked at Oliver, at his sincere eyes that stared at me with a mixture of love and concern. I thought of all the exchanged letters, the promises of a better life, away from that suffocating house. Yes, Mama, I love and trust him. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Dr. Gumersindo filed a request for special authorization for the marriage, alleging the psychological abuse I suffered. Mama testified, describing my father's obsessive behavior and the constant fear we lived in. As expected, Daddy reacted with fury when he received the judicial summons. He invaded the house screaming, threatening everyone. Who do you think you are to do this to me? Nobody is going to take my daughter from me. Nobody. That night, the violence that had always been latent exploded. He brutally assaulted Mama, breaking her arm and leaving her face unrecognizable from so much beating. My sisters and I locked ourselves in the room, terrified, hearing the screams and the sound of the blows. Dorothy, showing a courage I didn't know she had, jumped out the window and ran to the nearest police station. When the police arrived, they found Mama fallen in the kitchen, semi-conscious, while my father tried to break down the door of our room with an axe from the carpentry shop. The scene was so shocking that even the police officers, accustomed to domestic violence, were disturbed. Daddy was arrested that night. The charges were now much more serious: attempted murder against my mother, threats against the three of us, destruction of property. The judge had no difficulty granting the special authorization for my marriage, as well as a restraining order that prevented my father from approaching any of us. Mama was hospitalized for 2 weeks, recovering from her injuries. During this time, we stayed at a neighbor's house, Mrs. Caroline, who had always suspected something wrong was happening in our family, but never had the courage to interfere. If I had known, if I had done something before, Ichi lamented, while taking care of us. When Mama was discharged, we all went to Philadelphia, to Aunt Olivia's house. It was there that we started the preparations for the wedding. It would be something simple, just family and a few close friends. Oliver insisted we shouldn't wait too long. The sooner you are legally protected, the better, he said, always concerned about my safety. The news that my father had been released on bail 2 weeks before the wedding sent us into panic. He won't give up so easily, warned Mama. I know, Eugene. For him, this is a matter of possession, not love. We reinforced security measures. Oliver hired a guard to stay at the door of Aunt Olivia's house. We avoided going out alone. The address of the ceremony was kept secret, revealed only to the closest guests. However, even with all these precautions, I felt a constant fear, an anxiety that accompanied me day and night. In my nightmares, I saw my father appearing in the middle of the ceremony, dragging me away from Oliver. I would wake up screaming, bathed in cold sweat. It's normal to be afraid after everything you've been through, Aunt Olivia comforted me. But soon you'll be a married woman, with a new last name, a new life. He won't have power over you anymore. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that the wedding would be the end of that nightmare, the beginning of a life of peace with Oliver. But something inside me, an instinct I couldn't explain, told me that my father wouldn't give up so easily. On the eve of the wedding, I had such a strong premonition that it made me sick. What if he shows up? What if he tries to do something? I asked Oliver, as we walked through the garden of the aunt's house, enjoying a few moments alone before the big day. Oliver held my hands firmly. "I won't let anything happen to you, Gertrude. I hired 2 more security guards for the ceremony. Your father won't get near you, I promise." His determined look gave me some comfort. Oliver always kept his promises. Since I met him, he had moved mountains to help me, to get me out of that terrible situation. He would be my husband, my protector, my safe harbor. "Tomorrow at this time we'll be husband and wife," he smiled, kissing my forehead affectionately. "And we'll start a new life, away from all this. I'll take you to Pittsburgh, where I have a small apartment near the college. You can finish your studies, maybe even go to college too. We'll have the life you deserve, Gertrude." That night, I tried to focus on this vision of the future, this promise of happiness. I tried to push away the fears, the shadows that seemed to chase me. Tomorrow would be a new beginning. Tomorrow, finally, I would be free. What I didn't know was that my father was also making plans for the next day. Terrible plans that would transform what should have been the happiest day of my life into the most tragic. The day of my wedding dawned with a perfect blue sky, as if God had cleared the clouds especially for us. I woke up at Aunt Olivia's house with a mix of anxiety and hope. My hands trembled as Mama and Aunt helped me get ready. "You look beautiful, my daughter," said Mama, still with purple marks on her face, but with a smile I hadn't seen in years. She adjusted the veil over my hair and held my hands. "Today, your real life begins." The dress was simple but delicate. Mama had managed to finish sewing it even with her arm in a cast. It wasn't the dress of my dreams, made with time and care, but it carried all the love and hope we placed in that day. The ceremony would be at 2 p.m. in a small chapel on the outskirts of Philadelphia. For security reasons, only 30 people were invited. Oliver's close family, some friends from college, my mother, my sisters, and Aunt Olivia. Dr. Gumersindo would be one of the witnesses. We left the house escorted by one of the security guards hired by Oliver. In the car, I tried to focus on the happiness that awaited me, but I couldn't push away that oppressive feeling in my chest, as if something terrible was about to happen. "Is everything okay, my daughter?" asked Mama, noticing my unease. "I'm afraid, Mama," I confessed. "Afraid that he'll show up, that he'll ruin everything." She squeezed my hand tightly. "The security guards are watching. The police have been notified. He won't get near you. Today is your day, Gertrude. Don't let the fear of him continue controlling your life." When we arrived at the chapel, I was relieved to see that everything seemed peaceful. The security guard checked the perimeter and gave the green light. Inside, Oliver was waiting for me at the altar, elegant in his navy blue suit, his face illuminated by a smile as he saw me enter. The ceremony was simple and moving. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, I felt my heart stop for a second, fearing to hear my father's voice. But the silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," announced the minister, and finally, I could breathe. It was done. Legally, I no longer belonged to my father. I was Oliver Mendoza's wife, a married woman, free from that nightmare. The small reception would take place in a hall adjacent to the chapel. Nothing grand. A simple buffet, a few tables decorated with white flowers, a small dance floor. Mama had insisted that we have at least this celebration. "After everything we've been through, we deserve a little joy," she said. It was during the reception, when I was finally starting to relax, that everything fell apart. Oliver was talking with his parents near the drinks table when a man approached him. From where I was, I couldn't see who it was. I only noticed that Oliver seemed surprised, but not alarmed. "Must be some late guest," commented Dorothy, who was by my side. The man said something to Oliver, who nodded and followed him out of the hall. I remember thinking it was strange, but I didn't suspect anything serious. Maybe it was just someone from the chapel wanting to talk about some bureaucratic detail. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I started to get restless. "Where's Oliver?" I asked his mother, Mrs. Zelda. "I thought he was with you," she answered, furrowing her brow. "I haven't seen him for some time." That's when the panic started to set in. I asked one of Oliver's cousins to go look for him. He returned 5 minutes later, as pale as wax. I think you need to come with me," he said, his voice trembling. I followed him out of the hall to a small garden behind the chapel. What I saw there will be etched in my memory forever. Oliver was lying on the grass, a pool of blood spreading beneath his body. Next to him, standing, with a bloody knife in his hand, was my father. A scream escaped from my throat, a primitive, animalistic sound that didn't even seem human. I ran to Oliver, falling on my knees beside him. His eyes were open, fixed on the sky, lifeless. The knife had pierced his heart. "He wasn't good enough for you," said my father with a frightening calmness. "No one is. Only I know what's best for my princess." I raised my eyes to him, unable to process the horror of what was happening. How had he managed to get in? Where were the security guards? Why had Oliver gone out alone with him? "What have you done?" I managed to stammer, my fingers trying uselessly to stanch the blood that no longer pulsed from Oliver's chest. "What have you done?" "What needed to be done," he answered, taking a step in my direction. "Now let's go home, Gertrude. This circus is over." Oliver's cousin, who had brought me there, ran out to get help. I was left alone with my father and the body of my husband, paralyzed by terror. "I'm not going anywhere with you," I managed to say, my voice choked by tears and anger. "You're a monster, a monster!" Something changed in his look. The veneer of calm broke, revealing the madness behind. "You are mine," he roared, grabbing my arm forcefully. "You always have been and always will be." I tried to break free, but he was much stronger. He started dragging me away from Oliver's body, towards a side gate that led to the street. I screamed, struggled, dug my nails into his arm, but nothing stopped him. "We're going to have our own wedding," he whispered in my ear as he pulled me. "A real wedding, not this farce." That's when I fully understood the horror of the situation. The insinuations, the looks, the sick jealousy, everything pointed to something my mind refused to process. My own father saw me not as a daughter, but as... I can't even say the word. It's too repulsive. When we reached a small storage room at the back of the chapel, he pushed me inside and locked the door. The space was cramped, dark, full of cleaning materials and stacked chairs. The smell of mold and chemicals was suffocating. "You look so beautiful in that dress," he said, approaching like a predator. "I always knew you'd be the most beautiful bride in the world." "Daddy, please," I begged, backing up until I felt the cold wall against my back. "This is wrong. I'm your daughter." "You're mine," he corrected, his voice low and dangerous. "Only mine. That boy didn't deserve you. Nobody deserves you. Only me." When he touched my face, I felt a wave of nausea so strong I almost fainted. His hands moved down to my shoulders, then to the buttons on the back of my dress. "I'm going to show you what a real man is," he murmured. In one last desperate impulse, I grabbed a bottle of cleaning product from the shelf beside me and broke it against his head. The glass shattered, and he staggered backward, stunned, blood running from a cut on his forehead. I took advantage of that moment to run to the door, but it was locked. I started screaming, beating on the wood with all the strength I had. "Help! Someone help me! He killed my husband! He's going to kill me too!" I heard footsteps on the other side, alarmed voices, someone trying to open the door. But before they could reach me, my father recovered from the blow. With an animalistic roar, he threw himself on me, knocking me to the floor. I felt his weight on my body, his hands tearing the delicate fabric of my wedding dress. "Now you are my bride," he whispered, his hot, repulsive breath against my face, "as you always should have been." I fought with all my strength, scratching, biting, screaming, but he was much stronger. When I thought all was lost, that the worst would happen, the door finally gave way. 3 men invaded the storage room. Oliver's cousin, one of the security guards, and Dr. Gumercindo. In an instant, they pulled my father off me. There was a brief, violent struggle. My father still held the bloody knife and managed to injure the security guard in the arm before being finally subdued. I remained lying on the floor, the dress torn, my body aching, in a state of shock. I barely registered when the police arrived, when they took my father away in handcuffs, screaming obscenities and threats. "You are mine, Gertrude, mine! They can't separate us!" Mama found me like that, huddled in a corner of the storage room, shaking uncontrollably. She covered me with her own coat, hugged me, and cried with me. There were no words for that moment, only pain, a pain so deep it seemed it would never end. Oliver's body was taken away in an ambulance, even though everyone knew there was nothing more to be done. I was taken to a hospital where doctors examined my abrasions and gave me sedatives to calm the panic attack that overtook me when the adrenaline wore off. I spent that night, which should have been my wedding night, in a hospital bed, sedated, alternating between periods of unconsciousness and moments of terrifying lucidity when I remembered everything. Oliver dead on the grass, my father on top of me, the torn dress, the metallic smell of blood. In the days that followed, I learned that my father had bribed one of the chapel's employees to let him in. I discovered that he had told Oliver he wanted to give him a wedding gift and ask for forgiveness as a gesture of reconciliation. My Oliver, always willing to see the good in people, believed him and followed him to the garden, where he was brutally stabbed. My father was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and attempted sexual assault. The trial was a separate torment, having to relive everything, tell sordid details, face his gaze in the courtroom. But I did all that for Oliver, for justice, for myself. The sentence was heavy, 30 years in prison without the right to parole. When the judge announced the decision, I saw something in my father's look that I had never seen before. Defeat. Finally, he understood that he could never reach me again. After the trial, I fell into an abyss of depression. I lost weight, couldn't sleep without having terrible nightmares, couldn't bear to be touched by anyone. The mourning for Oliver mixed with the trauma of the abuse, creating a knot so tight inside me that I could barely breathe. "You need to get out of this state," Mama insisted, worried. "Oliver wouldn't want to see you like this. He fought so hard to free you." But how to explain to her that I didn't feel free? That even with my father in prison, I still felt his presence, his smell, his hands? That every time I closed my eyes, I relived that moment in the storage room, his weight on me, the feeling of absolute helplessness? 1 month after Oliver's funeral, when I could barely get out of bed, Mama came into the room with renewed determination. "Enough, Gertrude. I won't let him destroy you even from prison. Pack your things. We're moving." "Where to?" I asked, without energy, without hope. "To New Jersey. My cousin Aristotle has a small house in Atlantic City that's empty. We can start over there, away from all these memories." The idea of going so far away, to a place where no one knew our history, where I wouldn't be the murderer's daughter or the widow bride, lit a small spark inside me. Maybe, just maybe, there could be a fresh start. The move to Atlantic City happened on a cloudy day in July 1971. We left Philadelphia with few suitcases and many invisible scars. Mama, my sisters, and I boarded a bus bound for New Jersey, leaving behind not just a city, but an entire life of pain. Cousin Aristotle's house was in a simple neighborhood called West Side. It was small, but airy, with a little backyard where Mama soon planted some flowers. We had little money, just what Mama had managed to save from her sewing work and a small help that Aunt Olivia sent us to restart. In the first months, I hardly left the house. The trauma of what happened on my wedding day was still very much alive, like an open wound that bled at the slightest touch. I had nightmares almost every night, would wake up screaming, calling for Oliver, or begging my father to stop. Mama slept in the same room as me, always ready to calm me when this happened. "It will pass, my daughter," she would say, stroking my hair while I cried. With time, It will hurt less. But I didn't believe it. How could it stop hurting? How could I move forward after everything that happened? It was Dorothy who brought me the first ray of light. My sister, always practical, got a job at a fabric store in downtown Atlantic City, and 3 months after our arrival, came home with a proposal. "The store is going to start offering sewing and embroidery services," she explained, sitting beside me on the bed where I spent most of my days. "I told Mrs. Catherine that my sister is the best embroiderer I've ever known. She wants to meet you." I shook my head, rejecting the idea. "I'm not ready, Dottie. I can't." "Gertrude," she interrupted, holding my hands firmly. "You can't let him win. Every day you spend in this bed is another victory for him." Her words hit me like a slap. She was right. Even imprisoned, my father still controlled my life through fear, through trauma. I was letting myself be imprisoned again, this time in the invisible bars of the horror he had planted in me. The next day, with trembling legs and a racing heart, I accompanied Dorothy to the fabric store. Mrs. Catherine was a lady in her 50s with a warm smile and keen eyes. She looked me up and down and then asked me to show what I could do. With trembling hands, I took the needle and embroidery hoop she offered me. At first, I thought I wouldn't be able to. My fingers seemed not to obey me. But then, as the embroidery took shape, something strange happened. The repetitive movement of the needle, the concentration needed to create the design, all of this seemed to calm my tormented mind. For a few minutes, I managed to forget. "You have talent, girl," said Mrs. Catherine, examining my work. "When can you start?" So, at 18, I got my first job. At first, I worked only part-time, doing small repairs and simple embroidery. With time, as I gained confidence, I began to help with the more elaborate dresses, including wedding dresses. The first time I was asked to work on a wedding dress, I had such a severe panic attack that I had to be taken home. The white fabric, the pearls, everything reminded me of that terrible day. But Mrs. Catherine, who had gradually become a kind of mentor to me, didn't give up. "Face your fears, Gertrude," she advised me after she learned, through Dorothy, a bit of my story. "Transform this pain into something beautiful. Each wedding dress you help create will be a way to give another woman the happiness that was stolen from you." Gradually, with much patience and some relapses, I managed to overcome the initial panic. I began to see the dresses not as reminders of my trauma, but as symbols of hope, a chance to create happiness for other women, even if my own had been destroyed. It was at Mrs. Catherine's store, almost a year after our arrival in Atlantic City, that I met Jonathan. He had come to order a suit for his brother's wedding. He was a quiet man, of few words, with calloused hands from hard work and gentle eyes that seemed to smile even when his lips were serious. "The miss is very skillful," he commented, watching me take his measurements. "I've never seen anyone handle the measuring tape with such precision." It wasn't an extraordinary compliment, but the simplicity and sincerity with which it was said touched me. Jonathan Montgomery was completely different from Oliver. He didn't have the same formal education, nor the same eloquence. He was a simple man, a carpenter by profession, a few years older than me. But there was something about him that conveyed security, solidity. He returned several times for fittings of the suit, and with each visit, we talked a little more. He never asked about my past, never forced confidences. He just talked about his work, about the weather, about small everyday things. And somehow, that simplicity was exactly what I needed. At the final delivery of the suit, he invited me for coffee. "Just coffee," he assured, as if understanding my fears. "At the bakery on the corner, where everyone can see us." I accepted, more by impulse than by reflection. It was the first step out of the invisible prison I had been living in since the tragedy. One coffee turned into another, then into a walk in the park, then into an invitation to have Sunday lunch with his family. Jonathan's mother, Mrs. Deborah, was a welcoming lady who treated me as if she had known me for years. His father, Mr. Theodore was a reserved but gentle man who reminded me a little of my maternal grandfather. They had a modest but impeccable house in Ventnor Heights, another neighborhood of Atlantic City. For 6 months, our relationship remained in this safe territory. Meetings in public places, light conversations, gradually getting to know each other's families. Jonathan never tried to kiss me, never made any move that might frighten me. It was as if he understood, without me needing to explain, that I needed to go very slowly. One Sunday afternoon, as we walked along the Ventnor City beach, he finally asked about my past. "Gertrude, I know there's something painful that you carry. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I want you to know that I'm here to listen, without judgments." That day, sitting on the sand watching the sun set over the Atlantic Ocean, I told him everything. My father's strange behavior, my love for Oliver, the wedding, the murder, the attempted abuse, the trial. I told it without omitting anything, watching his face for signs of disgust or pity. But what I saw in Jonathan's eyes was just understanding and a contained anger that wasn't directed at me, but at the man who had destroyed my life. When I finished my account, he simply took my hand, the first physical contact he allowed beyond a brief greeting hug, and said, "You are the strongest person I've ever met, Gertrude." Those words, spoken with such sincerity, opened a floodgate inside me. I cried as I hadn't cried since the day of the tragedy. Not tears of despair, but of relief, of finally being seen not as a victim, not as a damaged woman, but as someone who had survived. 3 months later, Jonathan asked me to marry him. It wasn't a grand or romantic proposal. We were sitting on the porch of his house, having coffee after Sunday lunch. "Gertrude, I know you've been through a lot, and I understand if the idea of marriage brings painful memories, but I want to build a life with you, at your pace, respecting your limits. Will you marry me?" The proposal caught me by surprise. Not because I didn't know about his feelings. By this point, it was evident that we loved each other, but because I never imagined that I would be able to consider a new marriage after everything that happened. "I need to think," I answered honestly. "It's not you, Jonathan. It's that the last time I wore a wedding dress." He nodded, understanding. "We don't need to have a traditional ceremony. We can just sign the papers at the courthouse, with our families as witnesses. No dress, no party, nothing that brings bad memories." His consideration touched me deeply. I talked with Mama about the proposal that same night. She smiled, taking my hands. "Daughter, Jonathan is a good man. Different from Oliver, yes, but equally good, and you deserve this second chance." "But what if it happens again?" I asked, giving voice to my biggest fear. "What if my father manages to get out of prison somehow? What if he comes after me again?" "Your father will be in prison for decades," Mama assured, "and even if he tries something, we're no longer alone and helpless like before. We have friends here, people who care about us. Jonathan, his family. We can't live in fear forever, Gertrude." A week later, I gave my answer to Jonathan. "Yes, I want to marry you, but I really prefer something simple, without a ceremony." As promised, our wedding was just a formality at the Atlantic City courthouse in March 1973. I was 20 years old, Jonathan 27. Our families were present, my mother, my sisters, his parents, a few close friends. I wore a light blue dress that I had made especially for the occasion, not white, not a wedding dress, just a pretty dress for an important day. After signing the papers, we had lunch at Jonathan's parents' house. It was simple, relaxed, happy in a way that I didn't think would be possible again. At the end of the day, we went to the small house that Jonathan had bought in the Venice Park neighborhood, our first home together. On the first night as husband and wife, Jonathan was of a delicacy I will never forget. "Let's take it slow," he said, sitting beside me on the edge of the bed. "We don't need to do anything you're not ready for. We can just sleep together tonight if you prefer." That consideration, that respect for my trauma, made me feel safe in a way I hadn't felt in years. That night, For the first time, I was able to give myself to a man without fear, without flashbacks, without the ghost of my father hovering over me. Our first year of marriage was one of adaptation and healing. I continued working at Mrs. Catherine's store, while Jonathan prospered as a carpenter, specializing in custom furniture. Gradually, we built a quiet routine, a simple but happy life. In 1974, I received the news that Mama and my sisters were moving to Virginia. Dorothy had met a young man from Richmond and decided to get married. Mama and Harriet would go with her. The news saddened me. Despite already having my own family with Jonathan, the idea of being more distant from them caused me apprehension. "You're safe now, daughter," Mama assured me before leaving. "You have a good husband, a stable life. You no longer need me to protect you." She was right, of course. I was safe with Jonathan, but still, when the bus departed taking my mother and my sisters, I felt as if an important chapter of my life was closing. A few months later, I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought a mixture of joy and fear. Joy at creating a family with Jonathan. Fear of not being able to be a good mother after everything I went through. "We'll do this together," promised Jonathan, kissing my forehead when I told him the news. One day at a time. In January 1975, our first child, Isaac, was born. Holding that baby in my arms was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. Looking at his innocent little face, I promised myself that I would do everything to protect him, so that he would never know the kind of pain I had known. 3 years later, in 1978, our daughter Naomi was born. Our family was complete, our home full of life and love. Jonathan was the father I had always wished to have, loving, protective without being possessive, present without being controlling. As the children grew, I began to get more involved with decoration work. It all started when a store customer, knowing of my skills with embroidery and arrangements, asked me to help with the decoration of her wedding. Reluctant at first, I ended up accepting the challenge. It was surprising to realize that, instead of bringing painful memories, decorating that ceremony had a therapeutic effect. It was as if, by creating a beautiful environment for someone else's wedding, I was somehow rewriting my own story, transforming my trauma into something positive. Other orders began to emerge: small weddings, birthday parties, christenings. In 1980, I decided to leave Mrs. Catherine's store to dedicate myself entirely to event decoration. Jonathan supported me, as always, helping to build wooden structures for my arrangements, shelves to display my work. It was through this work that I met people from various towns in West Virginia. One of these connections led me to Harrisville, where I was invited to decorate the wedding of the mayor's daughter. The town charmed me immediately. Small enough to be welcoming, large enough to offer opportunities. "What do you think about moving there?" I asked Jonathan after my third trip to Harrisville. It was 1985. Our children were 10 and 7 years old. It would be a new beginning, a place to expand the business, and you could open your own carpentry shop instead of working for others. The idea of starting over in a smaller, quieter town appealed to Jonathan. "If that's what you want, we'll make it happen," he agreed, always my biggest supporter. The move to Harrisville marked the beginning of a new phase in our lives. We bought a house with a large yard where Jonathan built his carpentry workshop and I set up my decoration studio. The children adapted quickly, making new friends at the local school. Gradually, I built a reputation as an event decorator, especially weddings. Miss Gertrude of the Flowers, as they called me, became a well-known name in the region. There was something deeply reparative about transforming ordinary halls into magical spaces where other brides could live the dream that was stolen from me. Meanwhile, far away, my father was serving his sentence in the penitentiary. I received the news of his death in 1992, victim of a heart attack in prison. I felt no sadness, no relief, just a strange sense of closure. The man who had caused me so much harm had no power over me for a long time. "Are you okay?" asked Jonathan when I told him the news. "I am," I answered, realizing it was true. He died for me that day. a long time ago. Life followed its course. Our children grew up, studied, built their own lives. Isaac graduated in engineering and moved to Pittsburgh. Naomi married a local doctor and remained in Harrisville, giving us our first grandchildren. Jonathan and I grew old together, supporting each other through the ups and downs of life. When we completed 25 years of marriage, he surprised me with a party, not big or extravagant, but meaningful. It was the first time I wore white since that terrible day in 1971. "You deserved a real celebration," he said, as we danced under the lights that I myself had helped install. One that would erase the bad memories. And somehow, it worked. Surrounded by family and friends, dancing in the arms of the man who had helped me rebuild my life, I felt as if a cycle had been completed. The nightmare had finally ended, and I was awake, alive, loved. Today, at 72 years old, I live a quiet and fulfilled life here in Harrisville. My Jonathan, who is now 79, still works a bit in the carpentry shop at the back of the house, but only for pleasure. "I need to keep my hands busy," he says, while creating small wooden pieces for our grandchildren. Our house on Maple Street continues to be our safe harbor. It's not luxurious, but it's cozy and full of memories. Every corner tells a story. The growth marks of the children on the kitchen wall, the framed photographs in the living room, the furniture made by Jonathan, the curtains embroidered by me. I officially retired from event decoration 5 years ago, but I still serve some special clients. Miss Gertrude of the Flowers has become a kind of local tradition. There are brides who seek me out saying that their mothers had their weddings decorated by me, and now they want the same. This fills me with pride and gratitude. My days follow a simple and pleasant routine. I wake up early, around 6 in the morning, and prepare coffee for myself and Jonathan. We like to drink it on the porch, observing the birds that visit our garden. Afterward, I take care of my plants. I have a collection of orchids that is my pride and joy, as well as roses, anthuriums, and ferns. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I go downtown for my craft group at the church. We are 10 ladies who meet to embroider, knit, and chat. We make pieces to sell at the annual charity bazaar, which helps the town's nursing home. It's work that gives me a lot of satisfaction. On Wednesdays, I receive my daughter Naomi and her 3 children for lunch. Laura is 7 years old, Theodore 10, and the oldest, Andrew, is already 15. I always cook something special for them. The country chicken with okra that I learned from my mother, or the homemade tomato sauce pasta they love so much. Naomi followed a different path from mine. She's a nurse at the county hospital. But she inherited my manual ability and, in her spare time, helps me with some decorations. It's good to see that, in a way, the legacy continues. My son Isaac no longer lives here. He's in Pittsburgh with his wife and 2 children. A successful civil engineer, he built a solid career at a large construction company. Despite the distance, he comes to visit us at least once a month, bringing the grandchildren to spend the weekend with us. These are precious moments that we look forward to with anticipation. Once a year, usually in July, we travel to Richmond to visit my sister Dorothy. Harriet moved to New York many years ago, so we see her less frequently. Mama, my dear warrior, left us in 2018 at 95 years old. She passed peacefully, in her sleep, after a long life and, fortunately, with many more joys than sorrows in her last years. On Sundays, our house fills with life. It's barbecue day in the backyard, with Jonathan as the grill master. The children, the grandchildren, some close friends come over. The large table that Jonathan built especially for these occasions is covered with dishes, rice, salads, stuffing, cornbread, and of course, the succulent meat that he prepares with so much care. After lunch, while the men talk about football and politics, the women and I have coffee on the porch, exchanging recipes and news. The children play in the yard, running between the fruit trees we've planted over the years. It's a scene that always moves me, seeing the family gathered, safe, happy. At night, when everyone has gone home and the house returns to silence, Jonathan and I sit on the porch to see the starry sky. Sometimes we talk about the past, about plans for the future, about the children and grandchildren. Other times, we just sit in silence, enjoying each other's company, our hands intertwined as they have been for more than 50 years. Our last wedding anniversary, our golden anniversary, was an exciting celebration. The children organized a surprise party at the church hall, decorated with the flowers I always used in my work: white roses, alstroemeria, and baby's breath. Friends came from all over the region, distant relatives, couples whose ceremonies I decorated over decades. During the party, Jonathan took me to the center of the hall for a dance. To the sound of Fascination, the same song that played at our 25th anniversary celebration, he whispered in my ear, "You fascinate me more each day, Gertrude. Thank you for these 50 years." I cried, of course, not from sadness, but from profound gratitude. Looking around, at the people who surrounded us with smiles and tears in their eyes, I realized the richness we had built together. Not a material richness, but of affections, of bonds, of moments. At times, I still find myself thinking about what could have been, how my life would have been with Oliver, if my father hadn't destroyed everything on that fateful day. But I don't allow myself to stay in these thoughts for long. I've learned that looking too much at the past can prevent us from seeing the blessings of the present. Jonathan was my savior, my safe harbor, my life companion. Different from Oliver in many ways, but equally special. With him, I rebuilt not just my life, but also my ability to trust, to love, to dream. Our story wasn't always easy, of course. We had our ups and downs, like any couple. There were difficult moments, financial problems when inflation soared in the 80s, Isaac's rebellious phase in adolescence, my period of depression after menopause. But we faced everything together, supporting each other, finding strength in the union we built. The work with wedding decoration was an important part of my healing. Each ceremony I decorated was like a small victory over my traumatic past. Transforming ordinary spaces into dream settings for other brides allowed me to give new meaning to my own painful memories. I started with simple arrangements, using flowers from my own garden. Over time, I learned more sophisticated techniques, experimented with new materials, created my own style that mixed the rustic with the elegant. The brides of Harrisville and the region began to seek me out not only for the quality of the work, but for the sensitivity I put into every detail. "Ma'am understands what this day means for us," they often said. And I really did understand, perhaps more deeply than they could imagine. I never told my complete story to clients, of course. Only to very few people throughout my life. Jonathan, of course. Mrs. Catherine, who was like a second mother to me. And later, my children, when they were old enough to understand. Not out of shame, but because I preferred to build a narrative of overcoming, not of victimization. Today, when I look back, I see a journey of resilience. From the horror of that day in 1971 to this quiet afternoon on my porch in Harrisville, I've traveled a long path of healing. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but it was possible. The nightmares that tormented me almost every night became rarer as the years passed. The paralyzing fear I felt when seeing a man who remotely resembled my father dissolved. The emotional scars, although they never completely disappear, became less painful. Much of this healing came from love, the patient and respectful love of Jonathan, the unconditional love for my children, the love for life that, despite everything, insisted on blooming inside me. But it also came from work, from faith, from the community that welcomed me, from the small daily joys that I learned to value. I learned that life is not defined by our traumas, but by how we respond to them. That it's possible to build beauty from pain, that it's possible to find purpose even in the most devastating experiences. And that's what I do every day here in Harrisville. I live each moment with gratitude, embrace each joy with intensity, face each challenge with the strength I discovered I have. I am no longer that terrified girl from Appleton, nor the traumatized young widow from Philadelphia. I am Gertrude Oliver Montgomery, 72 years old, wife, mother, grandmother, retired decorator, a woman who learned that the greatest revenge against those who try to destroy us is to live a full and happy life. My dear friends, I've reached the end of this story that I've kept for so long. It's not easy to reopen old wounds, but sometimes it's necessary for them to heal completely. I've learned that our wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. I look at my hands today, wrinkled by time, and see strength in them, not weakness. These hands that once trembled with fear now create beauty for celebrations of love. What my father didn't understand is that true love doesn't imprison, it liberates. Jonathan showed me this every day, respecting my timing, my fears, my scars. I discovered that my voice, even trembling, has power when I decide to use it. If you're trapped in a cage like I was, remember, the hardest bars to break are the invisible ones, those we build within ourselves. My experience taught me that our story doesn't end with the painful chapters. You know what helped me? Transforming pain into purpose. Each wedding I decorated was a way to heal my own trauma, as if each flower I arranged was a tear transformed into beauty. At 72 years old, I carry scars, yes. But I also carry victories, loves, laughter of grandchildren, 50 years beside a good man. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance, and living well is the best revenge. Now I want to ask something different. If this story touched your heart, comment just the word dress. Only those who listen to the end will understand. This will be our secret, our way of saying that some stains can be transformed into embroidery. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video, it helps a lot. That torn dresses can be resewn into new stories. Thank you for listening to me, dear ones. This grandma continues to embroider her story one stitch at a time.